Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra and see how this phone holds up in 2021. Now first of all, this phone's successor just came out not that long ago, the S21 Ultra, and that phone is a wild phone. But so is the S20 Ultra, and there are some advantages that this phone has over the successor that kind of makes it a better deal in some areas. Now if you want to pick up this specific phone for the cheapest prices that I find, I'll link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the front of the Galaxy S20 Ultra, you can see we do have that 6.9-inch dynamic AMOLED display. And I said this before and I continue to say it, I think this was the best, screen on a phone last year, hands down. It's pretty much completely bezel-less. You have that hole punch display. It's 1440p, but on top of that, you have that 120Hz refresh rate as well, which is one of the best things that this phone had going for it. The panel, even though it was a crazy big size, like this was one of the biggest phones I think of last year, it was a solid phone at that, and the amount of features Samsung put into this phone, this is like the flagship of flagships. This was the craziest phone I think, and the panel itself was another humongous asset for it for sure. Now you have that USB Type-C port on the bottom, you have Samsung DeX and all that stuff, but you also have that microSD card slot, which is something that the successor actually took out. And as I mentioned last year, or when the S21 Ultra came out, that was something that was very annoying. I wasn't really too sure why Samsung did that. They make SD cards, so it was just kind of a confusing thing that they did. But this by far is one of my favorite things about this phone, that it still maintains that microSD card slot, which is a huge asset. Now on the back, you can see one thing that I do like about the S21 Ultra is that the S20 Ultra didn't have is the frosted glass back. The feeling of this phone still feels great. It still looks great for sure, but unfortunately it doesn't have that frosted glass back. And I really do think the back of these phones don't really look the best, the whole entire S20 series. Fortunately with the S21 series it does look better, even though it's plastic on the standard S21, but I do think the back of this thing still looks okay for the most part. You have wireless charging and reverse wireless charging on this phone too, so those things still hold up completely well. And I really do think that this phone, in terms of the sheer functionality and capability of this device, is still extremely awesome. This is a really awesome device, and there are just so many things going for it that it really just makes me think that this device is still a really good phone, and it's still almost like a flagship in so many different ways. Now we do have that camera setup on the back, and I'll go ahead and hit on it right now. It is that quadruple camera setup, so you have a 108 megapixel wide angle lens, 48 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, a 12 megapixel ultra wide sensor, and then a 0.3 megapixel depth sensor. And as I mentioned before, this camera, like how much better of a camera can you get? This was, I think, the best camera last year. I think it was better than the iPhones. There are some areas where those phones are better, but this camera by far is an amazing camera. First of all, starting off with the basic functionality, you have that triple camera setup. I think that depth lens, okay, it's great and all. I'm never really going to use it too much, but the fact that it does have that triple camera setup, the wide, ultra wide, and telephoto allows you to do a bunch of different functionality on this specific device. But you did also have that periscope telephoto lens, which allowed you to zoom in a crazy amount. It was 4 times optical and then 10 times hybrid zoom, and I used it, and it's crazy how much you could zoom in. So that camera is a crazy good camera for sure. On top of that, not only can you do 4K at 60, which is expected because the predecessor could do that, but you can also do 8K videos on this thing. Now this was, I think, one of the first phones in general to shoot 8K videos, and that is an insanely cool functionality that you have on this device. The fact that you can go ahead and just use this phone as you would, but just having that 8K capability is seriously something that's really awesome. A lot of phones still don't have it, and this phone came out last year. I don't know if this was the first iPhone or first phone to bring it, but it was something that was so cool, and I'm so glad this phone actually brought that functionality. On the front, you have that 40 megapixel lens. You could do 4K at 60 on that as well, and the front camera I think is great, but I don't know why a lot of these apps that take front camera videos and photos, things like Snapchat, Instagram, these apps still just don't work too well with the front camera of these Android devices. I don't understand it, I never will understand it, but these manufacturers of these apps really need to step it up and make these Android devices a little bit better when it comes down to the front camera. The back camera though is great on this thing, and the front camera is great as well, But I can definitely tell you, by far, this is still a solid camera, and it probably will still beat a lot of phones that come out this year as well in terms of a camera standpoint. So in terms of that pretty much covers up that specific aspect. Now hitting on probably, I think, the best thing and the other best thing, but I think it's probably like something that may not be the best thing for a lot of people. I'm beating around the bush, basically the software and the battery. So first of all, with the software, this thing just came out last year. Since its release, we got that, announcement that it's going to be getting an extra year of support. So I think that's great. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that it's still going to be lasting for quite a bit of time regardless. So we're probably going to be getting another 2 years of software support. So we're getting Android 11 with One UI 3. It's going to be getting One UI 4, and maybe it'll get One UI 5. I'm not really too sure. I kind of forgot which one this thing started with, but it's going to be lasting for a couple more years. And for an Android device, this thing's software lifecycle is really good, and it's getting an extra year of security updates on top of that as well. So I think that's another really awesome thing this device has going for it. So when it comes down to the software standpoint and longevity, that's great. This thing has that capability. Unfortunately, it's not my favorite version of software. It is pretty bloated. It has a lot of really random things going for it. So I think that's another pretty, unfortunate thing about it. But I do think the software is still a pretty, good asset for it for sure. I just hope they kind of stick to more of a stock approach. But again, there's nothing we can do about it. But the battery size on this thing is so crazy to me that it just makes me, it just boggles my mind every single time. It has that 5,000 milliamp hour battery inside of it. And this is a crazy large battery. It's funny because not that long ago, it feels like yesterday, but it was probably a couple years ago, we were getting like battery banks that actually only had like 5,000 milliamp hours inside of it. And to a lot of people, including me, that was like a good size, battery bank. And the fact that our phones have those size batteries already is crazy. I cannot wait for the day we have like 10,000 or 20,000 milliamp hour batteries on our devices. And the fact that this thing has reverse wireless charging allows us to easily share that power to another device as well. So this by far is one of my favorite things about the Galaxy S20 Ultra, and a humongous reason why you should buy it in 2021. Now, ending it off with the performance, this device, as mentioned before, has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 650 GPU, and 12 gigs of RAM on the base models, and then 16 gigs of RAM on the top tier model. Now, in this specific case, what I can tell you is the performance here is still completely fast. It's still completely relevant. It's not slow at all. It's just like at this point, when you're getting it to this type of level of devices, even like 5 years from now, this device is still going to be a killer phone. I see probably 12 gigs of RAM being like the base tier model for the Samsung Galaxy phones, or even all phones, probably in the next 2 to 3 years. So within now to then, you're still going to be having a killer phone for, so many different purposes. Funny enough, if you get the top tier 12 gig of RAM option, you can theoretically have so much RAM on this phone that it can rival so many different laptops that come out, MacBooks. It's just so crazy to me. Now, RAM is a little bit different on each device, but I am super glad that this thing has, a ton of RAM on the base models. But even beyond that, anything you're going to do with this phone, you're going to be perfectly fine. Lower intensive things is going to be fine. Medium intensive things is going to be fine. Heavier intensive things is going to be fine. Like extremely heavy multitasking, this and that. It's going to be perfectly fine. Really, the only limitation here is the software, in my opinion. Because the software is in stock, there will always be a lot of bloatware going on in the background. But I think for, beyond that, you're going to be having a solid experience on this type of device. It's not slow at all. It may be slower than something like a Galaxy S21 Ultra, because that one is newer and it has maybe a little bit more RAM on some models, but I don't know. There's really not that much of a reason to go from this device to an S21 Ultra, and it's basically its main competitor. I cannot think of another phone that has, an edge over the S20 Ultra right now. Maybe the Note 20 Ultra, but even then, the S20 Ultra still has so many cool little features and tidbits in it that makes it that much better of a phone in a lot of cases. And to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a Galaxy S20 Ultra in 2021? By far, hands down, yes. This phone is completely worth it in 2021. It is such a solid phone. It has so many different features inside of it, and really maybe the only downside is the price, because it still is kind of expensive, but it has depreciated in value quite a bit in a lot of different places, including eBay and Amazon. So you can get a really good deal on this phone. This phone was a massively expensive phone last year. Fortunately, it has gone down in value, so that's a really cool thing. But this thing has so many flagship type features still that, as I mentioned before, for the next 2 to 3 years, it's going going to be hard to rival this phone. I mean, the front of this phone looks beautiful. You have that hole punch display, 120Hz, 1440p, Samsung DeX on the bottom with that USB-C port, a micro SD card slot on this phone, which is another massive thing, a 5000 mAh battery on this phone, which is crazy big, a quadruple camera setup with that periscope telephoto lens and ultra wide sensor. These are really solid sensors, and you can shoot 8K videos on this thing too. Like, those are strong assets to have on this type of phone. On top of that, as I mentioned before, the performance on this thing is great. The software could be a little bit of an improvement, Samsung needs to work on, but it's still getting software support for quite a bit of time too. So I think this phone is still a killer phone in so many different ways. I think the main thing the S21 Ultra has going for it is that it looks a little bit better on the back, and maybe it's a little bit faster here and there, but it really doesn't matter to me. I think this phone is still a really good phone for sure, and I would highly recommend picking it up in 2021. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.